Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is 2:54 p.m. in Tokyo time. Just to remind you that you joined the ADBI webinar called Electricity Markets in Transition, Privatization, Competition, and Regional Cooperation. So before we start, let's, same as yesterday, let's take a photo with speakers, please. Everyone, like, put your camera on. This photo will be placed on ADBI website. Okay, so I put the gallery view. All right. Okay, Ranjita, please.
Yeah, okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So speakers, when you don't speak, you can mute yourself. Somehow I couldn't mute. So Yukabif, can you mute yourself, please? Somehow I cannot mute you. Ah, great. Thank you. I usually can mute, but somehow I couldn't mute ours today. Okay, everyone, please welcome. I will start with a very quick description how we did, exactly same as yesterday. So just to make it this webinar as interactive as possible, we have some solutions to make it interactive. So our audience will attend it actively, not just passively. Okay, so for audience, you have this screen view. You can see it right now. This is your screen. It's very simple. What you can use, unfortunately, chat is disabled for you, so you cannot chat for audience. But there are two options for you: raise hand and Q&A. During Q&A session, when the chair will invite, please, questions are welcome. So if you click raise your hand, then we'll invite you to ask your question verbally. So you will be allowed to speak. After the chair will announce your name, I will unmute you and you'll be able to speak. If you don't want to ask your question verbally, you can type it in Q&A box. So just click and type your questions. Speakers cannot type questions. You can only chat or ask verbally. But audience can type questions, and speakers, if we don't answer, they will be able to type it later, the answers. If we don't cover everything during the webinar, we might check your questions later. For the, I'm sorry, Ranjita, do you hear a signal coming from my computer?
Hello, Dina, can you hear me?
Working here. Hello. Hi.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, Dina, we can hear you well. Yes.
No, can you hear the signal coming tin from my computer? Is it disturbing or not?
No, I didn't notice.
Okay.
No, nothing was disturbing. Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. So for speakers, you have this view of the screen. You can type answers in Q&A, but you cannot type questions. And if you have questions, please click raise hand. Also, you can just unmute yourself and you can say, I have a question. Okay. I will ask all speakers to keep themselves muted and camera off when they don't speak. Once you start your presentation, then you can please unmute yourself and put your camera on. If you have difficulties with sharing your screen, we will share for you your presentation. Okay, and this is very important. As I mentioned yesterday as well, this event will be photographed. We already did it. Streamlined, video recorded. By attending, accepting connections, or continuing participation in the event, participants thereby consent to the possible use of the of their name, likeness, voice, spoken or written comments, or papers presentation in whatever form in all media publications, video sharing websites, recording, disseminations, for other external affairs purposes for the Institute without compensation or permission. This disclaimer, I will put it in chat so you can read it again. Just to tell you that after this webinar, we'll put video recording of this conference on our website, and also we'll put photos and presentations on our website. Okay, so great. I think we are very on time. Also, full agenda and speakers' biographies of this webinar will be available. I will chat very briefly, and you will be able to click the links and access our webinar information. Just a second. I'll do it right now.
So Dina, it's my turn, right?
No, just a second. I will.
Okay.
1 second, please. Yeah, I would like to announce our chair of the next session, Rabindra Nipaus. He is senior lecturer in economics, School of Accountancy, Economics and Finance, University of Wollongong, Australia. Rabindra, the chair, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Zina, and welcome everyone to Day 2, Session 1. So this session is titled Electricity Market Regulation and Competition, which pretty much resembles the theme of the workshop, the seminar in itself, right? So, okay, so we have 3 speakers lined up for this session. And before we start with the speakers, I would just like to thank Dr. Peter Morgan and his team for making this workshop happen, okay? So that's great. So our first speaker for today is Dr. Huaping Sun, who is a professor at Jiangxi University in China. So Huaping, you have 15 minutes to present your talk, after which it will be followed by 10 minutes discussion comments, okay, followed by a 10 minutes Q&A session, okay? So okay, the title of your paper that you are presenting is Identifying the Spatial Spillover Effect and Driving Factors of Carbon Lock-in of China's Thermal Power Sector. So without any further delay, the mic is all yours, Huaping. All the best.
Okay, thank you. Let's begin. Can you see my PPT opening?
No, I don't see that. Now I can see it.
Now it's okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Nice to meet you again. I'm so happy to do my presentation. Today, I want to discuss the topic is about the China's power sector. The topic is identifying the spatial spillover effect and the driving factors of carbon lock-in of China's thermal power sector. Okay, here is a very simple introduction for me. I'm a visiting scholar of UNR and NTU. Got a PhD from Zhejiang University and also do a postdoc in Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Okay, and now I'm a professor in Jiangsu University in Zhenjiang City, China. Okay, so due to the huge proportion carbon emission reduction of the power sector plays an important role. In order to explore the spatial connection between high carbon locking area and the low carbon locking area, the spatial method, was used to identify the influencing factors of power carbon locking in our 30 provinces in China. The year is from 2002 to 2016. And also the spatial spillover effect and influence factor of carbon locking were empirically analyzed, used the SDM model. Okay, so that's abstract or in the introduction. Actually, we found that urbanization rate significantly improves the regional power carbon locking level, while the government financial expenditure and the industrialization ratio significantly inhibit the regional power carbon locking level. In particular, GDP per capita and foreign direct investment has significant positive spillover effect and a significant special spillover effect, while the proportion of government fiscal expenditure and industrialization also has significant special spillover effect, while the effect is negative. Okay. So the second part is about the literature review. As we know, carbon locking was discussed firstly by Ura, a Spanish economist. He believed that the carbon locking of the industrial economy is caused by the co-evolution of technologies and institutions driven by increasing returns to skill generated by past dependence. Okay, actually, the existence of carbon locking effect has affected the innovation process and application of low carbon technology. So carbon locking often leads to the loss of carbon efficiency. A lot of the professors or researchers did research on that. Okay, so it's a unique topic to discuss why it is locked in and what's the key factors in China's power sector. Okay, we have three main points. First one is model design and data. Second is empirical analysis and robustness check. And the last one is conclusion and policy implication. Okay. Here we used the special econometric model. Due to special heterogeneity and dependency, regional carbon locking can present condition effect. That means when they are very near, the effect are affected each other. So measuring its spillover effect is of great practical significance for formulating regional coordinated emission reduction policies. So it has a very important policy implication. Well, the beginning point is a special hypothesis model. You can see here Y is affected by Y itself, but multiplied by a W. W means a geographical, metric, right? So it measures the special linkage from one region with his neighbors or nearer areas. And then also affected by other factors, just like traditional one, econometric factors, just like GDP or urbanization or technology. So X measures this kind of the factors. Beta is the coefficient, while the epsilon is the random, error. Okay. Well, the special error model, SEM, is a basic one. Besides the SDM, we use the both SEM and SDM, but mainly by SDM. It explicitly expresses the redundant spatial dependence caused by measurement error by adding the special lag term of the error term. So the expressing form of the model is as follows. You can see W here is not only one, W1 multiply Y, but also W2 multiply X and theta. So here, the W, that means the geography factor or spatial factor, not only affect Y, but also X together. So the SEM follows as this. And then, before that, we must test. Let me have a test to check whether they have the spatial effect or not. Only have it, then we can do the next. So in this method, Moran I model is a description of the special characteristics of attributable values in the whole specific region, which can be used to measure the overall spatial correlation and a special difference between regions. So molar index was selected to measure special heterogeneity in this study. His function is as follows. You can see here. It measures the special linkage between different regions. Okay. And essentially, the special regression model contains the information set to include information from observations in the gene-setting regions, that means nearer neighbors. To see this effect, we also consider the SDM model. So it can be rewritten as follows. That means the SDM model, it has every variable can have the W effect, right? The geographic effect. So it's more than SEM. Okay. And then the data. We use the data to measure carbon log-in, mainly from the IPCC 2006 National Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory Guidelines, and also China Energy Statistical Yearbook, and also China Electronic Power Statistic Yearbook, also China Statistic Yearbook, and also some variables is from the State Intellectual Property Office. Just like the innovation method, we use the patent data, which is from the IP office. Okay. Due to the lack of the energy consumption in Tibet and also the comparability with the data, we exclude Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and also Tibet. So totally 30 provinces and regions, and the time is from the year 2003 to 2017. Okay. Here is the empirical analysis result and our robustness test. Based on the special measure formula above, we use the MATLAB software to run and obtain the following results. As you can see, we also give the fixed FE, fixed effect model, and a random effect model. Well, you can see FDI totally is the negative effect, but it's not significant, right? Well, the second variable is also negative effect, right? Negative effect, and also very significant. Well, patent, you can see patent. It can be said right. It's a negative effect, and also significant, right? That means the innovation can reduce the carbon lock-in. So we need to promote innovation, right? While the urbanization, you can see urbanization will make lock-in more and more, right? It's positive effect. That means the urbanization level or urbanization model till now is not so good or positively affect on carbon lock-in. Still in the future, we need to transform this model, right? In China, we are some new plan to make this change. Well, the GDP and budget is not significant. Well, the export is significant. You can see it's negative effect. That means the export can reduce the carbon lock-in effect. Okay, and as we can see from the above, the four variable export. Just now we already explained it, right? Some it's positively, some it's negatively. You can see in particular the urbanization rate and the industrialization has significant spillover effect, and also the urbanization is positive. That means it will make the lock-in more and more serious. Okay, and then we also use the robustness check. That means use SDM model. Well, the basic function and the direction is okay. Now most is the same. It's okay. So it can be say the the three variable of government financial expenditure, that means the government policy support. Also, industrialization ratio and urbanization rate have significant effect on regional power carbon locking in. Among them, the urbanization rate significantly improve or makes the carbon locking in more and more serious. While the government financial expenditure and in industrialization ratio significantly inhibit the regional power carbon locking level. Okay, so that's the point. In particular, GDP per capita and foreign direct investment has significant positive effect, spillover effect, and a significant special spillover effect. Okay, the proportion of government physical expenditure and industrialization also has significant special spillover effect, but the effect is negative. Okay. So let's give our conclusion. A green growth path is crucial for reducing emission of greenhouse gases for sustainable global economic growth, especially when 30% of the carbon emission come from excessive energy consumption. So making the energy efficiency a crucial concept and a very key tools to reduction the carbon emissions. In recent years, therefore, governments have strongly invested in the development of green technology and innovation to enhance the energy efficiency. Similarly, the government institutions have been empowered to see to the implication of the energy policies that improve energy efficiency. The special effect of the economic development on the carbon emission.
Sorry, you have 1 minute. Sorry about
1
that.
minute. Okay, thank you. I have 2 slides. Okay. So we're looking, in fact, is mainly reflected in the spillover effect on the economic growth. China's power carbon locking has obvious special differences, where the overall performance is low in the east and high in the west. Over time, the overall coefficient of carbon locking and the equilibrium of the regional development have been greatly improved. Okay, so since the economic scale, the marketization level and the economic development degree are quite different. So we need to make more green investment in the future and support the green technology innovation, then leading to the better and better to carbon unlocking. Okay, so the last point, the economic openness also needed to be green trade and a green FDI. Okay, so green innovation and eco-innovation are needed, and also we needed green governance. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Huaping, for your talk on a very fascinating topic. So your presentation will be discussed by Dr. Bosan from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in the United States. So he's a policy scientist there. So Dr. Bo, please.
Thank you.
The mic is all yours.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Very clear.
Okay. Good evening. Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm happy to make some comments on Professor Sun's presentation. My name is Bo Shen. I'm from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Next page, please. Next page. Yes, my comments mainly have a couple perspective. One, I want to make a summary, and also I want to talk about the strengths of the paper, and also I want to talk about things are not clear in the paper, and finally I want to make some specific comments. Next page, please. Yes, the paper is actually studied the spatial connection between the region that have different level of carbon locking. So they utilize the spatial measurement method to calculate the influencing factor of carbon locking in China, which cover 30 province, all province, from 2002 to 2016. And the paper also analyzes the spatial spillover effect with the help of a spatial auto-regression and the spatial Durbin model. And the paper also discussed the policy implication of this spatial spillover effect of carbon locking. Next page, please. And the paper has a clear strengths, have impact. And first, they contribute to the understanding of the spatial spillover effect of carbon locking in power sector, particularly in power sector, which help identify regional strategy of reducing carbon dioxide emission in China. And the paper also introduced an interesting method of assessing the spatial spillover effect of carbon locking through calculating the carbon locking coefficient of different regions. And the paper also provide a specific case in terms of carbon locking. This will enrich the type of study case studied in analyzing the regional emissions. The paper also provide a better understanding about the spillover effect is of great practical significance for formulating regional coordinated emission reduction policies. And the data provided not only show the trend, but also provide the recent information. Next page, please. However, I would like to cover some things that are not very clear in the paper. First, the issue with the literature review. And the paper is talk about a spatial spillover effect of carbon locking of China's thermal power industry. However, the literature review has not much on the spatial element that it covered in the literature review. And also lack of a literature on thermal power industry and its climate impact. And the literature review also lack of literature, a review on carbon trading and allowance, despite the extensive coverage of this topic in the paper. And the unique contribution of the paper is not well explained. So the reader may not clear on what's the paper unique about. What the contribution made. And also the paper reviewed, the number of paper reviewed has a limited number, is only 35 reference. So that is kind of things are not clear. And next page, please. And also the logic and the structure of the paper not always clear. For example, the section 4, they call the conclusion and discussion. But actually is not concluding section because there is also section 5, the policy implications. And also the paper is on spatial spillover effect of China thermal power industry. But both the section 4 and the section 5 has not talked much about the direct discussion on this, on the spatial spillover effect. Most coverage is on the carbon trade, a carbon allowance. Next page, please. And also there's an extensive discussion of section 4 and 5 on carbon trading and allowance allocation. But it's very hard to find discussion on how this connect with the spatial spillover effect of carbon locking. Because I didn't see much transition. So I suggest that there will be a transition paragraph to link those two so that people, the reader will understand why you talk about carbon trading here in the section 4 and section 5. And the section 5 continue to cover the carbon trading, but policy recommendation at the end are not relevant to this. The policy recommendation go back to to this spillover, spillover effect, not on the carbon trading. And so the linkage is weak. Next page, please. And the policy recommendation need to be expanded because there are too few policy recommendation and too general and lack specific recommendations, making the paper less helpful in providing insight on how to take specific policy actions. And the paper, and also we are wondering whether your finding have any implication to countries beyond China, so that they can have a broader kind of impact of the paper. Next page, please. I would like to make some very specific comments. Some specific point I want to make. One is the literature review section. Maybe better to group with subsection. Right now, the literature review is hard to find the section from section to section. So it would be nice if you have a subtitle within that section. Like, for example, you look at locking, overflow, in fact, emission reduction measures. So people understand how you group your kind of a review. And also the factors, the factor of affecting the carbon locking of electricity. You list like a GDP, share of secondary industry, local finance, FDI, urbanization rate, and so on. And are there any other factors? Because you're talking about the thermal power industry, you're talking about the energy sector. So is there some other influencing factor that determine this spillover, in fact? For example, like an energy mix or pricing or energy pricing, there should be has some other factor other than those factors. And also the paper indicate that as early as 2014, per capita carbon emission were 45% higher than the global average, which I don't think is the case in 2014. The per capita is not that high at that year. And also finally, the some short the name need explanation. For example, in table 1, like you use the S rate, but nowhere in the paper I can find what that means. So that's need to be explained somewhere. Next page, please. And also finally, I think page 15 there on carbon market, the paper said United States used the market freedom scheme. So I'm not quite understand what that means. What's the market freedom scheme means? So that need to be make more clear, clarify. And page 15, for example, you use the transfer of high carbon industry to less developed country, namely the phenomenon of carbon output. So I'm kind of a little puzzled about carbon output, use this term. We normally we use like a carbon leaking or those type of name or a carbon export, but the carbon output is kind of interesting. I don't know whether that's the correct name. So that's one subject to discussion. And the paper often use our country. I recommend to clearly specify that it's China because it's for international audience. And you use the term of carbon productivity. So I think this term is a little bit strange. I understand your point. You kind of similar to saying it's carbon intensity, but carbon productivity it's a little bit odd because if we're talking about energy productivity, energy as a commodity, I can understand. But for carbon, it's emission. So the productivity is a little bit is subject to discussion. And also you use the term of carbon emission. So sometimes people use carbon emission for simplify, but really the emission is a carbon dioxide emission. As an academic paper, it's better to make that more precise, because carbon is not a pollutant, it's not emittent, it cannot be emitted. So that's one things I want to mention that. And the English writing sometimes really needs some improvement because sometimes sentence is not completed and sometimes writing is really hard to understand. So That's all my comments. But it's an interesting paper. Thank you very much.
So thank you both for your excellent comments and insights on the paper. So Huaping, would you like to respond to the comments raised by Dr. Bosan?
Thank you so much, Professor Senbo.
Thank you.
It's very clear and very, very specific. Thank you. We will revise it based on your so good points, one by one. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we can now move on to the question and answers from the audience, please. So I have a message here typed in from Dina, who says we have an audience already who has raised his or her hand to ask the question. So please go for it. Is it Rahmat? Hello, hi, Rahmat. Okay, so looks like the floor is open, so please.
Rahmat, I allowed you to unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, in the meantime, yeah, okay, so Rahmat, hello.
Yes, it was a mistakenly handed or so sorry for that.
Okay, no worries.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, take care. So any other questions from the audience, please?
Rabindra, may I ask, please?
Yes, Dina, please.
While we're waiting for questions, it's always a bit slow to start, and then we get so many questions, no time to answer it, like yesterday.
But
so I'll just
start, so please go for it.
Yeah, since the focus of the paper on the People's Republic of China, right? Maybe you can expand your audience to Greater Asia, right? Like for other countries, let's say, for which countries this experience, this paper will be still useful. Maybe other countries can learn from experience from China, right? And then you can get suggestions like which countries will be useful, how it could be useful. Then you expand your audience.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Tina. Thank you so much. Good idea. I will extend it to global level and general, general meaning, general recommendation, but a specific policy implication. Thanks. Very, very impressive and constructive for us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions, please?
Yeah.
Or comments?
Yeah. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Okay, I repeat, this is your last chance to answer, to ask any questions to Huaping. Please go for it if you have any.
Rabindra, maybe we can reply to this question in Q&A box. It's
yes, but
general question.
Yeah, this is not entirely related to Huaping's presentation. The query is more on if the recording of this webinar is available and whether the participants would get a certificate of participation and so forth. So
the recording will be available after this event.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Ranjita, please go for it.
Yeah, please.
So my question is quite general. Since in ADBI, we are working extensively on spillover effect, especially for infrastructure. So in paper, how do you conceptualize it and what are the different dimensions which you have covered in your conceptualization? Yeah.
Oh, you mean for other regions, right?
No, like how do you conceptualize, like what do you mean by spillover for a particular regions? So what are the elements which you have counted in that?
Oh, the specific region, right? Region is about the province level. You know, China has 34 provinces, but the other 3 is not the data availability. So we choose 30 province, okay? And for the driving force elements, as the board professor suggested, we will make more clear why we choose urbanization, industrialization, and GDP per capita, just like that. Why we choose, we will make it more clear. Actually, that's our driving elements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that question and the response from Huaping, it nicely sits to our next presentation. So our next speaker.
Okay, thank you.
Is Dr. Yukabet Majiwa from the university, from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya. So Yukabet is a lecturer in agricultural and resource economics, and the topic of her presentation is very much Australian. So the title is Policy Determination in the Face of Falling Demand and Aging Coal, an analysis of Australia's electricity distribution sector. So Yukabet, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, Kombawa. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors in Australia. That's Bunli, Level, and Paul Simons. And as you've heard, my name is Yukabet Majiwa. I'm in Kenya now. I was in Australia for my PhD, and I was involved in this project of electricity network. So the Australian electricity distribution was deregulated in 1998 with the setting up of the national electricity market. And the aim was to promote competition and reduce retail prices. And since then, the outcome has been mixed because we find, and that is what this study is trying to find out, is there efficiency or inefficiency levels, because once we identify the efficiency level within the electricity market, that is very important, especially to stakeholders and policy makers since the deregulation. And we find that this name covers the states of Queensland, New Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, and Australian Capital Territory. And it was developed to create a competitive electricity market and to promote productivity and efficiency through increased output and lower prices. The price controls in Victoria were removed in 2009 and in South Australia in 2013, in New South Wales in 2014, and in South East Queensland in 2016. However, even with the introduction of competition, electricity prices, especially the households, still rose. And to retain the customer loyalty, what the retailers do is to increasingly offer discounts of electricity bills. And we could see the keynote speaker actually highlighted the scenario where they offer discounts and you could pay less for electricity. They could give you $50 and such, and that could promote electricity consumption. And this is the map where the networks are covered, the distributors. We have Western Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, and New South Wales, and Victoria, and Tasmania. So with Western Australia, it's not included in this analysis because it's still not connected to the name. So what is the problem? As noted by the report that was done in 2018, that network, environmental, and retail supply chain costs all make a significant contribution to electricity prices that are faced by consumers. And the electricity production since 2009 had fallen. And you see the main aim of was name was to promote output, but we are finding that electricity had actually fallen down, and due even prices as prices for household electricity and consumers was rising. And this was attributed to the multi-billion outlay on infrastructure, which actually contributed to the falling consumption. And higher prices have also led to falling consumption, with consumers switching to cheaper alternative and more energy efficient sources such as the solar energy. And with the falling demand for electricity, that has actually not led to falling electricity prices. And the result is that has been blamed on the high level of expenditure on electricity infrastructure, especially the wires, the poles, the substations, and the power line towers, and the high levels of maintenance or replacement, which leads to rising costs and other costs such as the fixing the faults and damaged power lines. With a lot of storms that happened in the recent past in Australia and the bushfires, that has been causing a lot of supply outages. And again, we are having that repairs to related infrastructure, such as electricity meters that are located at every house and business, actually added costs to the distributors. And under the regulatory environment where network businesses are monopolies and thus are not subject to the usual market forces, that has also contributed. And thus there are a number of obvious, with this scenario, there are a number of obvious inefficiencies that have developed within the electricity network, which this article aims to determine. And so the main objective of this paper was to find what is the extent of the distribution of electricity in terms of efficiency and how that has progressed relatively in the deregulated Australian market, and to assess the performance of the electricity distribution system and also locate the sources of efficiency or inefficiency. And we used the data for the period 2009 to 2017, and we limited that because of the data availability. That is when we could be able to get full panel data for that period. And with the output, it was done in such a way that what we were measuring, the output was the electricity that was delivered in watts, in gigawatts, and inputs, which is the operating expenditure, and also the electricity capacity measured in megavolts, and the length of the distribution network. And we find that we captured 14 electricity distributors that cover the 5 territories. And we use the data envelopment analysis, that is the input-oriented CRS, that's constant returns to scale, and the variable returns to scale of the data envelopment analysis method to generate the technical efficiency scores. And we find that theta was equal to 1. It means that distribution network was technically efficient, and where it was less than 1, it means it was not fully technically efficient. And in the second stage, we used the Simon-Wilson 2007 criteria for double bootstrap data envelopment analysis truncated regression method to determine the sources of inefficiency. And we find the results indicate that generally the technical efficiency scores, when we look at the variable returns to scale, we find that in average, the years, it ranged between 6 and 8 of the 14 network being fully efficient. And you can see over the years, the distribution networks that were fully efficient was Able Energy, Australia Grid, Endeavour Energy, City Power, Gemena Electricity, and Power and Water. And for the constant returns to scale were much less. They ranged between 2 and 6 over the years, and we are only finding the Aussie Grid and the City Power being fully efficient over the years. That's from the 2009 up to 2017, and with the others being efficient in some years, like Gemena being efficient in 2009 and 2010, and from 2013 onwards. And the same is the same with Endeavour Energy, being efficient in 2010 up to 2013 and from 2015. And but majority of them, when using these constant returns to scale, many of them were inefficient. So in general, the results include that the mean data environment analysis efficiency scores for both the VRS and showed variation. They didn't show much variation over the sample period, but the number of efficient distributors under VRS, it ranged between 6 to 8, with the lowest scores being experienced, being 0.898. That means they still needed, even given the level of inputs, they could still increase their output given the level of inputs, the current level of inputs. And with under CRS, it ranged between 2 and 6, with the lowest score also being 0.835 in 2011. And the number of efficient distributors that are operating under VRS were much greater than those operating under CRH, which implies that the network distributors could improve their performance by changing their scale of operations. With the scale efficiency scores input oriented from 2009 to 2017, we are finding that it's only Energex that was actually operating and decreasing returns to scale, with the majority, almost all of them, operating under increasing returns to scale, except for a few years where some operated under decreasing returns to scale. With decreasing returns to scale, it means the output is much less given the inputs that have been put there. And with the increasing returns to scale, it means there's potential of output actually being much higher given the level of inputs. And when we did the radio and the Slack movement, we'll find that in most or all these network distributors, they can actually reduce their operating expenses and network capacity. And by that level, and we can give an example like Aussie Grid can actually reducing their operating expenses by 82.01 million Australian dollars. From that level, they could operate better at 241 million. And it's in all, you can see in most of all the networks, they should be able to reduce their operating expenditure and their network capacity, and also they reduce their circuit length given. And
so you give it your 2 minutes, please.
Okay, when we did the sources of efficiency, we find that Reliability, if when the network is more reliable, that actually reduced inefficiency or it increased efficiency. And with the average age of the poles, when the age of the poles increased, it actually reduced efficiency or it increased inefficiency. And the number of customers, when they increased, that actually increased the efficiency levels, and with the reduction, it reduces the efficiency. So the policy implication is by identifying the inefficiency within the electricity network is particular interests. And that is because this is important because this paper actually confirms the annual benchmarking report on electricity distribution networks that has been showing the performance. And this study provides unadded evidence that distributors are operating well below the efficient levels. And except for 2013 and 2015, less than 30% of distributors were actually efficient. And with the excess use of inputs, which we calculated from the ratio of input, that's the radio movement, they can be reduced so that to increase output. And reliability can promote efficiency, and inefficient distributors can actually improve network reliability by replacing the aged poles, and increasing the number of customers can improve the efficiency, which suggests that there is a larger market which could actually encourage health competition. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Yukabeth. So that was a very interesting presentation on a very concurrent topic in the Australian context for sure. So I am actually your discussant for this presentation. So if you could please, unshare your screen, that would be great.
Edgar, 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 Edgar. Yes.
So, all right, everyone. So my name is Dr. Rabindra Nepal, as if you don't know me yet. Okay, so I'm a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Wollongong, and I'm the discussant for the paper that Yukabeth just presented. So this paper hovers around electricity market liberalization. So what happened in the Australian context is in 1998, the Australian electricity, sorry about that. So the Australian electricity sector was deregulated, okay, with the aim of promoting competition and reducing retail prices. The empirical evidence after more than 2 decades of reforms seem to have contrasted with the theoretical appeal of reforms. This paper looks into exploring whether there are whether there may be underlying causes leading to inefficiencies within the power distribution industry. So the purpose of this paper is to examine whether the electricity distribution industry is operating efficiently. And this article aims to determine a number of obvious inefficiencies that have developed within the electricity network. And the methodology, as you have just heard, is based around data envelopment analysis, okay? So the literature review of this paper is based around the application of DEA in general, application of DEA in the electric power industry in particular, and limitations around DEA, which actually motivated the use of second stage bootstrap regression based on Simmer and Wilson, okay? So the contribution to the literature, as the authors claim, is that there are only a handful of studies attempting to examine the sources of efficiencies and inefficiencies. This study focuses on determining sources of those efficiency or inefficiencies facing the electricity networks, focusing on the Australian electricity distribution. So to test their hypothesis, the authors use a software package, RDEA version 1.24, developed by SIM and Bestri Mayana, okay, 2016, to carry out the DEA and double bootstrap estimations. Now, as you have just heard, So there are 14 electricity distribution companies included in the sample. Northern Territory is included, but Western Australia is excluded due to data limitations. The data used for deriving efficiency scores are drawn from the AER website. So AER stands for the Australian Energy Regulator, okay? To those of you who don't know it. So benchmark efficiency comparisons for 2009 to 2017 are based on data from the respective distributors' economic benchmarking RIN response documents. Now, what you can infer from the data characteristic is that the data actually the authors use is a small panel data. So where you have your number of cross sections n exceeding the number of years t. Okay, so you have a big n and a small t in that sense. Okay. All right. Now the results. There are only 6 distributors that remain efficient throughout the sample period. So Evo Energy, Ausgrid, Indivior Energy, City Power, Jamena Electricity, and Power and Water. The results suggest that many distributors were operating well below efficient levels for the period concerned. And in the second stage analysis, the results indicate that reliability promotes efficiency, suggesting that a focus should be placed on the continuous supply of energy. Also, an increasing number of customers is shown to improve efficiency. So, and based around the results, the conclusions and the policy implications that the authors propose is that inefficient distributors can improve network reliability by replacing aged poles where only needed to improve efficiency and sustainability. At the same time, larger markets could encourage healthy competition given an increasing number of customers. It's shown to improve efficiency. So this basically summarizes the paper. Now, the merits of the paper is that the paper tackles an interesting research problem that is relevant to all regularized electricity markets globally and not just the Australian electricity market, right? So the focus of the paper is on distribution network companies that are mostly economically regulated, and they are regulated based on incentive regulations such as price caps and revenue caps in liberalized electricity markets. Okay, this was one of the important facets of liberalization. Now, the paper also employs the Simar and Wilson's double bootstrap data envelopment analysis truncated regression approach. The application of this DEA approach in the energy sector is limited. Fine. Okay. Now, however, the paper needs some major revisions in the following areas. So the introduction section of the paper is currently weak. The section should include the motivations, background, and the contributions of the paper. The authors can utilize the existing literature on Australian electricity networks regulation for this purpose. Also important is to present the Australian problem in a global context so as to demonstrate the international scope of this research. Now, when it comes to the literature review, the discussion of the literature on the application of DEA in the electric power industry is good. However, the novelty of the DEA application in this research is related to the second state bootstrap regression. Why is this estimation technique a superior estimation strategy for this research? Moreover, why is DEA analysis suitable for this study, given the fact that the data is actually a small panel data, okay? So that needs to be addressed. Now, robustness tests. The study does not include any robustness tests of results at the moment. This is certainly important. I suggest that the authors should consider employing a bias-corrected fix-effect analysis as suggested by Bruno. This is just a suggestion, but I'm sure you can think of other techniques, other alternative techniques and specifications as your robustness test, okay? So in this way, you can compare the results from the second stage DA regressions with the bias-corrected fixed-effect results or whichever other alternative estimations and specifications you use, okay? Now, conclusions and policy implications part needs to be further strengthened. Now, how about the impact of underlying regulatory framework in improving service quality? Because you have identified that improving service quality improves efficiency. If then, you know that the distribution networks are economically regulated. So in that sense, what is the impact of underlying regulatory framework in improving service quality? So is the current form of incentive-based regulation framework adequate for Australia, or an output-based regulatory framework, for example? So do we need to move away from the incentive-based regulation to more of an output-based regulation where the electricity distribution companies are let's say, penalized or rewarded based on their operational performance, such as delivering good power quality or service reliability, for example. So output-based regulatory framework can better target the improvements in service quality. And last but not the least, the future research suggestion is not clear and needs to be strengthened. So a sentence is included currently as a suggestion for future research, but the statement seems vague. So I guess with these revisions done, the paper will be very strong and interesting, and I wish you all the best, Yukubeth. Please, if you'd like to respond to the comments I have just raised, please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you for the comments. I think they are very doable, and they can be able to improve on the paper. And we had issues with the small data set, so we thought maybe the second stage, Seema and Wilson could be able to help with the bootstrapping, and with the calculation of the DA data envelopment analysis. Maybe you'll try on the stochastic production frontier, but those are issues that we can actually look at and discuss with the authors to see how the paper can be improved. But we thank you very much for your feedback.
My pleasure to hear that. So the floor is open for questions, please. Anyone wants to ask any question to Yukubeth? Please also feel free to type in your questions. Hello, hi, Heike, yes, please.
Hi, yeah, hello. One question. So one of the results you mentioned is that reliability has a positive impact on efficiency, right? And I was wondering whether you can definitely say this, or whether you have a problem with reverse causality here. So thinking that also efficiency might have an impact on reliability. So what we see here is some kind of correlation. Maybe we see a causal effect, but actually I don't see that you can really provide information on this in your paper. So have you thought about this kind of things? Thank you.
Hi, Yukubeth, would you like to respond to Heike's comments, please?
Yes. I'll answer this way. In a way, reliability can affect, but then it's not a direct input in this productivity analysis, because we're looking at direct inputs and the direct output. So in a way, I'll say yes, but that is where we are capturing it in the second stage to see how it can affect. But because it's not a direct input, then we didn't include it in the analysis.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a hand raised from Russell Smith. Hi, Russell, would you like to ask a question to Yukubeth?
Yeah, thanks, Ravindra, and thanks, Yukubeth, for a very nice paper. My question is sort of a little bit more general, and so obviously you've done a lot of work there on the Australian market. What are your thoughts, Yukubeth, on the reasons for the high energy prices in Australia? Do you think it's do you think it reflects sort of inefficiencies on the supply side, or do you think it's more on the demand side around sort of sluggishness and switching and so on? I was just wondering if you could comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation yesterday. And I'll answer it this way. I think it's in both ways, because we've also been trying to look at analyzing the efficiency levels throughout the whole chain, that is from the generators to the distributors and also to the consumers. But in a way, we haven't gotten enough data to be able to actually analyze on the customer side, on the retail side, what are these sources of inefficiency, and on the generation side. So where we were able to get complete data at the moment is on the distributors. But I'll say, as we were also looking at the data from the consumer side, we'll find that there is a lot of wastage. There's a lot of wastage even with the retail side, which we are actually planning to confirm.
Right. Thank you very much.
I think Rehamat wants to ask a question. Hello, Rehamat. Hi, Rehamat.
Maybe Ravindra, I can ask question.
Yes, sure. I think that seems to be another mistake again. So please go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I like the conclusion that about efficiency, but I know that in Australia there are lots of solar panels, right? Renewable energy. So what is any role of renewable energy on efficiency, or is it doesn't have any role?
This paper we did not, we were not able, we haven't gone to the generation. We haven't, we are not able to go to individual customers, because with solar energy, it's mostly at the customers level, and some of them would even get concession if they are using solar energy, and there are a number of small retailers doing such kind of analysis. But in this paper, we were not able to, because as I've said, we've not been able to capture on the customer side and what kind of efficiency. And that way we can be able to see even the ones who are more efficient, whether it's the people using the solar or integrated, or the ones using the electricity generated from the distributors, from the distribution network. So it's something that we could be able to do in the future, but not at the moment, because then it means we capture the household use of electricity at the household level, at the customer level.
In house, supply side, like utility scale solar, utility scale, yeah, generation.
I didn't get your question again.
Yeah, I mean, did you consider the inputs? What's the source of energy, like solar, if they use storage or not, they use wind power, the generators?
We did not, we have not done the analysis of the generators, although we have a few data sets to do that, because we were actually getting we were basically looking at the distributors at the moment, the network distributors, the ones who have already been obtained from the generators. So, and as I said before, once we are able to do an analysis from the generation for the whole value chain, that is from the generators to the distributors to the customers, we'll be able to disintegrate if these particular generators are using solar power, which is rare, considering that most of even these networks, a few of them are a few of them are private, and some of them are actually owned by the government. So most of them have been using electricity for generation, but a few of them have adopted the solar. So when we are able to disintegrate right from the generation to the customers, we'll be able to even identify the generation source of inefficiency.
Thank you very much, Yukibet. So we have time for one last question. So anyone wants to fire a question to Yukibet, please? So it looks like, oh, Heike, yes, please.
I just would like to add to the question raised by Dina, because I think that the renewable generation connected to the distribution networks is becoming a really interesting topic in the future, because it raises costs of the distribution networks, right? At least when they have an obligation to connect the renewables like solar and wind. And in Germany, we have a discussion on this at the moment, whether the costs increase the distribution level. So very interesting comment or question from you related to that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Heike. I think you have once again taken us back to the discussions on system integration, efficient system integration. So that will be a good topic for research in the days to come. So look, this sets up nicely to the next presentation to follow, and we're actually on time, so that's great. So the next presentation for this session will be delivered by Mr. Jonathan Wagner, who is a research assistant at Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. So his title of the paper is "The Cost of No Reform: Assessing the Impact of Different Electricity Pricing Regimes on Indonesia's Energy Trilemma." So Jonathan, the stage is all set for you. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So the paper I present to you today is the collaborative work of me and my co-authors, Raphael Heffren, Marc Fabian Körner, Teresia Somano, Martin Weibelzahl, and Gilbert Fritgen. And I'm very happy to have the great opportunity to share some parts of it here with you. The focus of our paper is Indonesia, and we analyze a possible major reform to the country's electricity sector, namely the introduction of an energy-only wholesale market. In my talk, I will explain the problem setting, provide some background and details on the proposed reform, briefly present the model and data we use, discuss the results, and ultimately summarize the main policy implications. The Indonesian electricity sector is currently organized as a single buyer market, in which the vertically integrated and state-owned utility PLN buys, transmits, distributes, and sells all electricity produced in Indonesia, thereby resembling an artificial monopoly over the electricity sector. The independent power producers that operate in Indonesia have to sell all generated electricity to PLN at fixed prices. PLN then sells the electricity to consumers. This can explain why PLN still owns and operates more than 75% of generation capacity. Overall, generation is dominated by conventional power plants, with coal making up 54% of Indonesia's generation capacity. The structure of Indonesia's electricity sector and the focus on conventional power plants may be explained against the background of the energy trilemma, which comprises three prominent objectives of energy governance that are often seen as conflicting. The first objective, energy security, refers to guaranteed energy supply, and Indonesia has performed poorly with respect to this objective in the past, especially compared to other Southeast Asian countries. While there have been significant improvements over the past decade, the electrification ratio still differs between regions and power cuts are frequent. The second objective, energy equity, refers to the affordability of energy services and is of importance for Indonesia since the country has struggled with poverty for many years. Key measures of Indonesian policymakers to improve on both energy security and energy equity were and are therefore to keep control of the electricity sector and the transmission infrastructure, to keep retail prices artificially low by fixing them, and to expand fossil fuel generation capacity. This focus on an energy supply chain based on state control and fossil fuels has resulted in a situation, however, where the third objective of the energy trilemma, namely energy sustainability, is mainly neglected in Indonesia. Nevertheless, in 2014, the government has announced ambitious targets to significantly increase the share of renewables in Indonesia's energy mix. Compared to 6% in 2014, renewables are to account for 23% of the energy mix by 2025 and for 31% by 2050. There have been several rather small-scale reform attempts in past years intended to integrate more renewables into the electricity sector. However, they have proven less successful, and it seems that a more fundamental reform is necessary. And such reform could be the introduction of a wholesale market for electricity. This could break up the current structure of the electricity sector, introduce competition in generation and sales, and thus allow renewables to become cost competitive. Many countries around the world have successfully implemented wholesale markets for electricity. What they typically have in common is that the transmission sector remains highly regulated. There are, however, differences with respect to how wholesale market trade is organized. In particular, three main design options have emerged: nodal, zonal, and uniform pricing. These pricing regimes vary in how they manage limited transmission capacities of the network and how pricing rules take these scarce capacities into account. The figure on the very left illustrates an exemplary electricity system. The circles represent so-called nodes, which are locations in the electricity system where either a power plant feeds electricity into the grid, or a consumer takes electricity out of the grid, or both. The lines represent transmission lines between the nodes. Under a nodal pricing regime, all economic and physical restrictions of the system are perfectly integrated and therefore fully considered in the market equilibrium. The resulting node-specific prices then adequately reflect local and temporal scarcity in form of price peaks. Next, under a zonal pricing regime, nodes are pooled into different pricing zones that share a common price, as can be seen in the figure in the middle. Here, the lower two nodes are pooled into one price zone, and the upper node forms a second price zone. As a result, the market equilibrium only considers the physical restrictions between the price zones, and intra-zonal transmission restrictions are neglected. This requires ex-post redispatch of the TSO, as the TSO may not be able to transport the produced electricity to the corresponding consumers. And finally, under a uniform pricing regime, all nodes are pooled into a single zone, which is why physical restrictions are completely ignored in the market equilibrium. Rather, only production and consumption-related constraints are considered. In direct consequence, and as under zonal pricing, the TSO needs to perform redispatch after spot market trade. These three examples illustrate that the pricing regime chosen for a wholesale electricity market will directly determine the profitability of private investments in new generation capacity. For all three pricing regimes, there are valuable experiences regarding the benefits and challenges from countries which have already successfully liberalized their electricity systems. Nodal pricing, for example, has the benefit that it allows efficient dispatch of generation, while a challenge exists regarding low competition and market power abuse in nodes. Zonal pricing has the benefits of increased intra-zonal competition, while a challenge exists regarding reduced local signals for long-run investments. And lastly, uniform pricing generally comes with the benefit of high market liquidity, while a challenge relates to possibly high redispatch costs. As we have seen, it actually matters how a wholesale market is set up. Therefore, in this paper, we want to answer the research question: how can different pricing regimes support Indonesia in balancing its energy trilemma? We believe that a fundamental reform of Indonesia's electricity sector can only be a success if it balances the country's energy trilemma. To answer this research question, we set up three long-run pricing models that allow us to model each of the three pricing regimes. We collect real-world data on the electricity system in Indonesia, and we evaluate the computational results and analyze them against the background of the energy trilemma. Our model represents an economic multi-stage game where the different players anticipate the other players' optimal decisions taken on 3 subsequent decision stages, as depicted on this slide. In the mathematical formulation of our model, each decision taken on the 3 stages translates into an objective function with several subjective functions. In order to use the remaining time of my presentation to present the data and results to you, I will, however, not go into detail here. To assess how the different pricing regimes may help Indonesia to balance its energy trilemma, we apply real-world data of the Sumatra and Java-Bali subnetworks to our 3 models. We focus on these 2 regions mainly because of data availability. To represent the electricity networks, we use 16 nodes, 1 node per province, as illustrated in this figure. We allow investments in additional transmission lines, as well as between the 2 islands. For electricity generation, we consider all power plants that were installed in 2018, and we allow investments in new power plants at all nodes, except for coal, where we restrict new investments due to possible real-world restrictions, such as geographical conditions or political resistance. Finally, since prices are fixed by the government in Indonesia, real demand functions cannot be observed, which is why we calibrated hourly price elastic demand functions for a representative day. Let me now present the computational results. First, the welfare levels were calculated. As can be seen in this table, the highest welfare level is realized under nodal pricing. The lowest welfare level is realized under uniform pricing. This result reflects the literature on pricing regimes, and is not surprising since nodal pricing is considered the most efficient of the 3 regimes. Our results further illustrate that welfare decreases when nodes are pooled into zones. Comparing uniform to zonal pricing highlights that market splitting increases welfare. Similar to the welfare levels, the consumer surplus decreases from nodal to uniform pricing. Overall, the levels of welfare and consumer surplus do not differ much across the 3 pricing regimes. Nevertheless, the results indicate a clear decreasing trend of welfare and consumer surplus from nodal over zonal to uniform pricing. Second, as expected, redispatch costs increase from zonal to uniform pricing. Again, this fits with what I explained before. Under uniform pricing, the network is not considered at all when private firms make generation investments and spot market clearing takes place. Third, the results illustrate that the maximum renewable capacity is installed in the uniform pricing regime, followed by the zonal and the nodal pricing regime. Comparing uniform to nodal pricing, roughly 18% more renewables capacity is installed when using a uniform pricing regime. With respect to conventional capacity, under uniform pricing, even roughly 60% less conventional capacity is invested as compared to nodal and zonal pricing. Fourth, the results indicate that under all pricing regimes, the TSO invests in additional transmission capacity. And interestingly, under all 3 pricing regimes, the 2 islands of Sumatra and Java-Bali are being connected via transmission lines. Given that there is an ongoing debate over such a link, our results indicate that it would be efficient in any of the 3 cases. And finally, we calculated the resulting electricity prices. As you can see, on average, consumers would have to pay the smallest price under zonal pricing, followed by nodal and uniform pricing. It is important to note that there may be distributive consequences when deciding for one of the 3 pricing regimes. For example, under nodal and zonal pricing, consumers in Java-Bali would have to pay a higher price on average compared to consumers in Sumatra. Under uniform pricing, all consumers would obviously pay the same price. Now,
you have 3 minutes, Jonathan. Sorry
thank
about
you.
that.
Now, returning to our research question and how different pricing regimes can support Indonesia in balancing its energy trilemma, our results indicate that zonal pricing may support Indonesia in achieving energy equity. Given that affordability of electricity is high on the political agenda, a zonal pricing regime would help policymakers in Indonesia to keep prices low. Next, our results indicate that uniform pricing may support Indonesia in achieving energy sustainability. Given that Indonesia wants to reach its renewables targets and needs to replace conventional power plants with renewables like wind and solar PV, uniform pricing might be the right option for policymakers in Indonesia. Lastly, Our results indicate that all free pricing regimes may support Indonesia in achieving energy security. Given that assuring energy access and reliable supply is still high on the agenda of policymakers in Indonesia, all free pricing regimes are an option. Finally, our analysis suggests that no best pricing regime exists for Indonesia. Rather, the free pricing regimes have quite different impacts on the three objectives of the energy trilemma. Now, before I summarize our policy implications, let me quickly address some of the limitations of our study. First, our evaluation is limited to Sumatra and Java Bali, and future research may also consider the remaining regions of Indonesia. Second, due to lack of some real-world data, our data entails some assumptions. Making data of better quality available in the future might mitigate this issue. And third, our models are limited regarding further policy instruments, such as network fees, which we did not consider. Let me now conclude with the policy implications of our work. Transitioning from the current single buyer market to an energy-only wholesale market for electricity may be a fundamental reform that allows Indonesia to reach its goals and at the same time to balance its energy trilemma. As our analysis highlights, policymakers need to be aware that implementing a wholesale market comes with different design options, each possibly having quite different impacts on the electricity system. There are numerous experiences with wholesale markets, and policymakers may learn from other countries about the benefits and challenges of each design option, as well as about how to implement such a market. In deciding which pricing regime to implement, policymakers should first decide which of the objectives of the energy trilemma they want to focus on, and then implement the corresponding pricing regime. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am happy to receive your questions.
So thank you very much, Jonathan. Indonesia is always an attractive example of reforming electricity market. So your presentation will be discussed by Dr. Ghazi Salahuddin. So Ghazi is an associate professor in economics at the Department of Management and Engineering at Linköping University in Sweden. So Ghazi, please, the mic is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a nice presentation and very informative paper about the cost of no reform. So I will discuss about the paper and also I share some of my opinion and thought of the paper. So in the paper is mostly discussed about the some important concept on the area of energy sector, such as like the increase the share of renewable energy sources. And interestingly, in this paper, there is a new component added in the energy trilemma, that is energy security, energy equity, and the energy sustainability. And the paper highlighted the importance of the operational and economic efficiency under the energy system, as well as the policy reform were intent to improve the ability of the energy system to provide the electricity reliably at low cost to the consumer. Also, the study highlighted the important issue for negative consequences of the fossil fuel-based electricity generation increasingly become apparent in many countries. And policy highlighted also aim to replace the conventional power plant to the renewable energy sources. And also the renewable energy sources still now in many countries, like not in the abstract position, particularly in the context of developing and emerging country. And also the energy transition is also very sensitive issues for the emerging and the developing countries as well. So these are the overall background of the study, and the research question highlighted how can the different pricing regimes support the Indonesia in rebalancing its energy trilemma. And also the presenter already discussed about the electricity market structuring based on the nodal pricing, zonal pricing, uniform pricing. And the study is particularly focused on Sumatra and Java Valley electricity subnetwork. I didn't go for details because as the presenter already discussed about the very details of these issues. So after discussing, presenter already mentioned it, based on the data availability or the resource availability, Sumatra and the Java Bali is the study area or investigated area for this research question, but it could be interesting to look about the other cities in Indonesia and to make a comprehensive plan, because it also be very complicated if the policy is based on Sumatra and Java Bali, and if that policy may not be fitted to the other region in Indonesia, that could be a complicated and complex issue. So I think that need to be considered in the discussion point. And also the electricity regime, they provide a brief overview of the electricity price regime in the context of the worldwide electricity market liberalizations, and also discussed about the no best pricing regime exist, and then details discussion about the Indonesian energy system. I would like to highlight it in the model section, a couple of my concern as we are approaching to the energy, the degree of energy transformation in the global or individual countries' energy system. In the theoretical model, I didn't find the understanding of the how should we considering the degree of energy transformation in order to address the point for sustainability. So because this at the moment, because the issue is very important in the context of the issue of sustainability, because the fossil fuel transformed to the more renewable energy sourcing. So what degree of transformation process is required to achieve the sustainability? Or I'm more interested to know about that what actually the speed is actually needed to the emerging or the developing countries to transform the energy transformation from fossil fuel to the renewable energy in order to achieve the sustainability. I think these are the one of the most challenging questions in besides the electricity market in order to fulfill the mandate of the climate goal. So that's also another perspective, because in developing country and many of the Asian emerging countries are very climate affected country. So it could be interesting to know in the policy perspective, what would be the appropriate speed. Like in European level, EU level, there is some mandate from different year setting, 20%, 40%, 60%, the way they can put the mandate. But we don't know exactly what would be the developing countries or what would be the space, like speed of space for this transformation process. So this is one of my important concern in the theoretical model. Also in terms of the contribution, I think that would be a really unique contribution if we can address these issues. If I understand correctly, the literature still didn't address these issues in the context of the developing countries electricity market. The second, in terms of theoretical model concern, when we're discussing about this electricity market transformation in a theoretical model at the different stages, one of the important stages when we're thinking about this network and different energy mix, that the point you already mentioned in your paper as well as in your presentation, when you combine these different sort of energy mix, and energy also sources depends on lots of climate nature related issues, like related issues. So in that case, there is a concern about the uncertainty. So I'm interested to know that in the theoretical model, when you develop the different stages, how did you address this uncertainty when you think about this energy mix combination? So if I understand correctly, I didn't find any uncertainty parameters in your model to address these issues. So in terms of modeling part, in the theoretical modeling part, my two concern point is, one is the what degree of or what is the level of speed is required for this energy transformation in the case of Indonesia, and should we can draw a conclusion or should we can draw a generalization of this speed to the other developing countries such as like in Indonesia? Number one. Number two is what is the how should we control the level of uncertainty when we are discussing with the different mix of the energy related issues? So these are the most theoretical concern about the theoretical model of this paper. So the paper also, this we already discussed that. So, and the result of this paper is very interesting, particularly for me, that pricing regime to able equally balance for all the three horns of the trilemma in Indonesia. Each of the pricing regime is able to foster the Pacific horn to the energy trilemma, and also the nodal price regime maximize the welfare in Indonesia, whereas the uniform price regime support the energy sustainability based. But regarding the point of the welfare effect, so I would like to another point to add it because when you're discussing about this welfare effect, the welfare effect in here, is it the way, because this part I'm a little bit confused, is it the welfare effect you mention it to generating the electricity, or is it the welfare effect you try to highlight it to the transformation process from fossil fuel to the renewable? I think this part of the discussion of your introduction make it focused on it, like is it like the poor people didn't have the electricity, now they receive the electricity, that has a welfare impact no matter whether it is in fossil fuel or renewable. But in according to your point in third point to the sustainability, that is the point related to the transformation, so fossil fuel to the renewable, so that also linked to the welfare impact. So I'm interested to know, like in your like microeconomic based macro foundation model, how did you thinking about this transformation? And in this context, I think there is some literature is there based on the dynamic statistic general equilibrium modeling, DSG framework, where they can explaining this transformation. So I would like to suggest it's a very, very important point from the economics perspective, the welfare effect. So but I'm interested to know, is it the welfare effect you clearly mean it from this transition of the sustainability, or is it the welfare effect the people didn't have the electricity, now they receive the electricity facility within the region? And then in order to also you can highlight it, some of the limitation of the point, that's I just write it again in here, like the network fees, also the study is based on the Sumatra and Bali, also the lack of real world data. So these are the issues. I think lack of real world data based on the yesterday some of the very interesting seminar, some of the experimental based or like a random trial based survey could be also interesting in this context. So this is so far my point, as the paper is very theoretical. So my summary of the point is very theoretical as well. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ghazi, for your insights. Jonathan, you have a chance to respond to Ghazi's concerns and comments.
Yes, so thank you very much for this very insightful discussion and for your very good recommendations. I think the points you raised are very valid, and let me quickly try to address each of these points. So with respect to the first aspect you mentioned about the degree of transformation that is needed and about the speed that is needed. So of course, when we talk about energy sustainability in our paper, we do not address sustainability in its whole broad range. Rather, we only refer to the amount of renewable capacity installed as a first indicator for a more sustainable electricity system. So I think in order to be able to say a bit more about what degree of transformation is needed and about the speed, I think this is something we could very well implement in our last section about the transformation pathway, which I did not include in the talk, but which is part of the paper. About the second point, uncertainty in the energy mix, this is something I think we could do a bit more sensitivity analysis. What we model is a representative day, and I think we assume perfect foresight. So sensitivity, so uncertainty in the energy mix is something that we should certainly address more. Now about the welfare question you had, whether it's about let's say more macroeconomic effects on welfare or about welfare in the electricity system. I think it relates to both in our paper. So if the cost of generation go down, this is good for overall welfare. and if we can thereby serve demand better of consumers, then and this then feeds back to lower poverty levels, for example. This is also in the end leading to a higher welfare. So this would be my remarks to your points raised, and I think we take all of them, and we'll definitely consider them in the revision of our paper. So thank you again.
So thank you, Jonathan and Ghazi again. So the floor is open for questions, please.
Ravindra, maybe while we're waiting for questions, I can ask.
Yeah, please go for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Ghazi, for a very good presentation and discussion. Sorry if I understood it correctly or not. I'm not sure what's the pricing currently in Indonesia. So when you compare the free pricing regimes, what is the current situation? Can we compare, like, first question, should government of Indonesia do reform at all? So then convince them, let's say, if you don't do reform, then you are losing opportunity to have more renewable energy or to decrease price. So can we compare with the current situation? And the second suggestion, not a question, when I like your conclusion, like you were giving policy recommendations at the end, you said, well, it all depends on your objectives. So first make clear on your objectives, and then you have certain different recommendation depending on objective. So I suggested, how about you make a table with different objectives, and for each objective, let's say, different policy recommendations, because you said it depends on objective. But if I'm the policy maker, okay, I have my objections, and then you give me a table, maybe it could be graphical abstract or in the conclusions part, like a table. So policymakers will be very easy to understand, right? Just suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dina. So your point about the figure we could include in the paper is very good. We were actually thinking about doing this to even better summarize our main findings. And with respect to your first question about how we could compare the free pricing regimes to the current regime, this is actually something we will tackle extensively in the revision, because this is, as you mentioned, a very important point. So I agree with you on this.
Okay, any other questions, please?
I'm Pradeep Pereira from ADBI. I just want to know, how did you derive the nodal prices and the zonal prices and the uniform prices? Are they the sort of market clearance prices at each node or each zone, or country as a whole? Or did these prices, or have you sort of arrived at these prices using some other mechanism?
Yes. So in the nodal pricing regimes, they are, as you said, nodal prices. And in the zonal pricing regime, you calculate one price for all nodes that are included in these zones. For example, in our paper, we used the zonal configuration where we took one zone for Sumatra and where we took one zone for Java Bali. So there is one price for all nodes that are combined in Sumatra, for example. And in the uniform pricing regime, you derive one price for all 16 nodes that are in the whole electricity network we considered.
So my question is, how did you calculate these prices? Are they the market clearance prices, or are they the prevailing prices which are decided by the regulators?
They are the market clearing prices.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for your question.
So we certainly have time for more questions.
Maybe I can comment, since Jonathan, your methodology looks very interesting and would be nice to apply to other countries. Maybe it would be possible to share your codes and data with a journal. You know, we have open data access, right? So if you can share, then researchers from other countries could apply to, say, in Malaysia, China, Kazakhstan.
Yes, this is a very good point raised by you, Dina. Actually, I think the models we use are very well suited to be applied to other countries. And I think making these available to everyone is certainly something we aim at for the publication.
Thank you very much. That's also good for you because we'll increase citations, and for us it's good. That's easy for implement it for other countries.
Any comments and questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please go for it. Okay, it looks like we have no more questions and comments. So we have wrapped up this first session for day 2. Okay, I would like to thank the presenters and the discussants, as well as all the participants for actively participating in this session. So thank you very much. I guess the next session chair is Dr. Farhad. So please, the mic is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ravindra. It's a pleasure to chair this session, which is the second session on electricity market regulation and competition. So in this session, we are going to have 2 papers, and this is the last session before the concluding remarks. Let me invite the first presenter, Professor Qazi Salahuddin, Associate Professor of Linköping University in Sweden. And the paper is on analysis of forecasting models in electricity market under volatility. Qazi, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present the paper in this session. So analysis of forecasting model in electricity market under volatility. It is the paper is a co-authored, several co-authored paper by Wu, Maziar, Farhad, and Yahya, Pontas, and Jacob. So on behalf of the co-authors, I will presenting the paper in this session. So the paper is mostly discussed about the predictability or forecasting measure in the electricity market. One of the interesting observation in the predictability or forecasting in the electricity market price, we observed there is several different types of predictability measures are exists in the model, and we are interested to see for Swedish context that what type of predictability measure could be interesting or could be fitted for electricity market. So in general, the literature has strongly driven by one types of or one specific model try to fit for a specific cases. But in this study, we are comprehensively looking for several types of predictability measures to identify the short-term predictability in the electricity market. And why this is an interesting issue to discuss, as we are aware that many of the countries are developing new energy policy to secure their energy system. And over the past decade, Sweden, like many other European countries, has been largely promoting the renewable energy such as wind, solar, biomass to produce the green electricity while reducing the output from nuclear power. And this is not only the affect the electricity price in the long run, but also increase its volatility in the market since the electricity production profile has been shifted from a relatively reliable mixture of the nuclear and other sources as well as in the supply using the wind and solar. And therefore, it is understanding of the short-term electricity price become more important for all players in the market. But there is also the one challenging point in the electricity market is become very complicated, complex. Also, the source and of the energy as well as the energy mix and the dependency of the energy sources. So all sum together, the energy market is also become very complicated, and sometimes due to the global geopolitics in the oil market also create the sometimes vulnerability also the energy market as well. And energy conservation program and energy efficiency also improvement have changed the demand. On the supply side, the electricity generating profile changes depending on energy policy in the country, which again embeds the uncertainty from a long-term perspective. And in the increasingly competitive electricity market, forecasting the day ahead price is the fundamental for all market participants, and accurate forecasting such as the price enables the power supplier to adjust their bidding strategy, and it allows the consumer to drive a plan to protect themselves against the high price. As we mentioned in my background of the study, that previous literatures are strongly depends on some specific models such as ordinary least square, error correction model, co-integration approach, vector autoregressive integrated moving average, generalized autoregressive conditional heteroscedasticity, machine learning, optimization, network, quantile smoothing, generalized additive model. So there is lots of other model are used in the literature to predict the short-term electricity prices. Despite the significant literature evaluating the forecasting accuracy in the various approaches, there is no concrete consensus regarding the framework best suited to identify or to understand the dynamics of the electricity market. So we extend our study by utilizing the wavelet based forecasting approach, because wavelet approach has some comparative advantages which has been observed in the financial market in order to capture the spectral behavior. Some extent we can also claim it sometimes capture the volatility of the information set. And short-term electricity price forecasting is interesting in many aspects, because studies on the short-term electricity price forecasting have received the considerable attention in many previous studies. So, so our empirical study, or our aim of this study is to evaluate the short-term price forecasting dynamics using the data from 4 different regions in the Swedish electricity market. Why we are choosing to the Swedish electricity market? There is a couple of reason is also there, because Sweden within the country they have a 4 different regions in the electricity market from north to south, and due to the climate condition from north to south also have some environmental weather or climate differences, as well as the in terms of the export and import from the energy sources from between different regions is also not the same, and as well as in the north and south Sweden demand and supply side condition is also not the same. And second important component, also Sweden also transforming the fossil fuel to the renewable energy sourcing in a recent year, and Sweden also significantly increased the renewable energy sourcing in recent years. So, and also Sweden is connected to the North Pole with the Norway for the electricity connectivity, as well as in the EU connectivity as well. So all sum together, it is quite interesting to investigate the volatility modeling or volatility forecasting modeling in the context Sweden. So we perform the out of sample forecasting and back testing, evaluate the performance of this model by utilizing the root mean square error and symmetric mean absolute percent error. And our result provide the guideline for policymakers, be interesting for providing the guideline for policymaker, operational manager, investor related electricity market. So the contribution of this study based on our understanding, this is the first kind of study identify the multi-resolution wavelet based decomposed series in combination with OLS modeling to forecast the electricity price in the Swedish context. And also this approach is not much widely used in the electricity market, if I understand correctly. And the expansion of the renewable electricity production in Norway and Sweden has led to increase the volatility in electricity market prices as well. So we already discussed about the Swedish context. So I just like to little bit go. And our study main methodology we apply in here, we apply the set of the conventional or classical approaches for forecasting, including ARIMA GARS types of model, like GARS, generalized autoregressive conditional heteroscedasticity, IGARS, EGARS, and as well as phi GARS and E-component GARS as well we applied. And these are the different types of GARS model in the condition of different specification with both linear and non-linear specification we applied in our investigation. In addition, this conventional ARIMA GARS process, we're also looking for the improvement of the predictability measure by adding the multi-resolution decomposed approach. And this multi-resolution decomposed approach, we're incorporating to the GARS and GARS types of specification, we are interested to see whether the wavelength-based approach for forecasting in electricity market perform better compared to the conventional ARIMA GARS types of modeling. So we already been observed that the 4 different region has the different characteristics based on the descriptive statistics. We already observed it. The region 3 and 4 is comparatively higher volatility in compared to region 1 and 2, and skewness is observed in the region 2. So it means that the reason is not likely identical, so they have a different characteristics based on the also observed in based on the stylized effect of the descriptive statistics. So our empirical settings in a very short precise the to evaluate the performance of the forecasting model, we forecast the 1 step ahead the electricity market returns using the rolling window estimation, and we look at the training size 15, 30, and 50 days, forecast the market returns over the out of sample because we are interested to see the sensitivity of the forecast window. And we then analyze the forecasting model using RMAC and SMAP measure, and we consider the improvement obtained from the ARIMA autoregressive moving average conditional generalized autoregressive conditional heteroscedasticity model, and based on the multi-resolution analysis, which is based on fundamentally wavelength decomposed based approach to benchmark, and which is simple ARIMA GARS model. And there are gain from utilizing the wavelength-based decomposition in forecasting in electricity markets when the rolling window size is 15. So we check the rolling window size between 15, 30, and 50 days. However, the only 50 days we can find the window 15-day window size, the wavelength-based multi-resolution based analysis are performing well. And all the MRA-based model outperform the benchmark model in reducing the RMAC and RSMAP model, and limited improvement is observed when we are looking for the longer window size, such as like 30 and 50, and no gain from wavelength-based decomposition in forecasting in Swedish electricity market for the larger rolling window size. And based on the improvement of the accuracy test, we use the Diebold-Marino test for the improvement in forecasting accuracy for wavelength based in compared to the simple model. Simple model in our case is ARIMA GARS model. And all forecasting models significantly outperform ARIMA AR1 process, and which indicate the benefits of including the moving average term in the mean equation. And particularly MRA ARIMA GARS model achieved the higher test statistic and show the better performance of the MRA AR than other model. This indicates the existence of the permanent transitory effect of the conditional volatility process. However, there is not much improvement for the different types of GARS models, such as like GARS, EGARS, phi GARS, IGARS, and etc. The result indicate the choice of variance equation does not result the better point of forecast both in wavelet and simple model. The conclusion or overall summary of these findings is the accurate forecasting may be enables to the power generator to offset the uncertain demand and supply for different regimes, which may eventually lead to a reduction in the variability of the electricity prices. And these findings could be important with regard to the stability of the grid and economic profitability of the market participation. And the grid operator may be better able to avoid the grid disparities and exemplified by large variation in electricity prices, and improve understanding regarding the accurate forecasting significantly contributed the economic benefit of the market participants on agent. And finally, this may lead to a reduction in the demand and supply disparity, eventually a reduction in the uncertainty in electricity prices. So our result, empirical result of the robust forecasting model capable of displaying the importance of proper forecasting process design and policy simplification in the context of market efficiency and predictability in the Swedish electricity market. Thank you for listening this short presentation, and I hope we will receive the very good comment from the discussant, Professor Baum.
Thank you very much, Ghazi, for presenting within the time. Next, I would like to invite Professor Bond, Derek William Bond of London Business School for kindly discussing this paper. Professor, please.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this paper. I just want to check that my screen is sharing well and that you can hear me. Please.
Derek, may I ask you please to amend display settings, because we are viewing two screens right now.
You're viewing two screens. Okay.
Yeah. On the top, display settings, top left. Top left?
Yes, yes.
Top left, yeah.
Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, it's clear now.
That's better. Yeah, it's yes. Having two screens, you sometimes swap over between them, don't you? But so we're set. So thank you very much. And I am pleased to be commenting on this. I'm always pleased to be commenting on models associated with forecasting electricity prices. And this is an interesting one. I mean, in some respects, it's got a kind of a classic motivation. A lot of people are looking to improve short-term forecasting methods. It's been an active area of research for a long time, and it remains so. And there continues to be a lot of scope for improvements here. I mean, the precision with which day-ahead forecasts have to be made and the complexity within which those forecasts have to be specified remains challenging. And so it's good to see another contribution here. So although this has been researched for a long time, this is still a very, very topical area and well worth trying to kind of create improvements. And as far as the actual focus of attention, I mean, there are a number of ways in which you can look at forecasting prices. There's a lot of interest in intraday pricing at the moment. There's a lot of interest in balancing market. Amongst traders, there's a lot of interest in forward markets. But the day-ahead market still remains the most focal point. It tends to be the underlying for any derivatives. It's usually the most liquid in most markets. And it has a lot of advantages in terms of operations. Setting prices day ahead, as the speaker said, allows the consumers to potentially adjust consumption. It allows the physical players to be able to optimize their unit commitment decisions and so on. So this is an important focal point, day-ahead pricing within an active area of research. It's good to see a broad comparison, and this is quite a broad comparison. the speaker listed a large number of methods, some of which were not compared. I think it would be a massive undertaking to try to compare all of the different methods which have been presented for forecasting day-ahead prices. And so even though this is a broad comparison, it is still selective. And it's quite selective within what I would characterize as univariate methods based upon time series. I mean, it doesn't get into a lot of multivariate methods, and I'll come back to that later. So it's a broad comparison, but within the class of univariate time series. It's good that there's a focus on volatility. Power prices are extremely volatile, and many people in the industry will say that they are more interested in forecasting uncertainty and hedging uncertainty than necessarily coming up with accurate expectations. So that is an important aspect. And in that respect, GARCH is a good and standard and trusted approach for modeling conditional volatility. There are a number of variations of GARCH, and the authors make some comments on that. But the most interesting innovation, I think, in this paper in terms of the range of approaches is the use of wavelets. I mean, that has been used by a few people, but not widely used. And so it was very interesting to see a comparison of wavelet methods within what I would call the more traditional ARMA methods. And so that is a novel inclusion. The ARMA GARCH does very well, and rather better than I would have expected, actually, in this. And that I think speaks to the robustness of the approach. The more complicated wavelet method, I mean, that's interesting there, and it will be good to probe this in the discussion later on. I think the fact that it performs comparatively well on the short rolling window estimates is interesting in that it's obviously able to extract useful predictive information with a relatively short estimation period. And that's somewhat surprising, because normally you would expect the more complicated methods to require a longer time series for estimation. And so I think that is a very interesting conclusion. On the 15 days, it performs comparatively better. Its comparative performance decreases as you go to 50 days in this study. People are beginning to look more at estimation windows, and it's only really become actively researched by a number of researchers around the world in the last few years, which I think is really surprising, because I mean, we all know that the robustness of forecasting methods depends over the period at which they're estimated. And you know, a lot of emphasis is placed upon trying to choose the best forecasting method, whether it's a REMA or whether it's a spectral method, or whether it's based upon wavelets or more complicated regime switching methods and so on. And so there's a lot of focus on actually different methodologies, but the size of the estimation window surprisingly gets relatively little attention. And so it's good that this is a key aspect of this paper. I would actually like to have seen more work on the rolling window, and actually a little bit more insight into why one method performs better over shorter periods than others. I mean, the key issue in the estimation window is that you would always like to have a longer estimation period to get smaller sampling errors and forecast with a more complicated model. But of course, the longer you go back, the more you're moving into a period which might have got quite a different structural capabilities and implication from the present. And so the trade-off is interesting there. I mean, sometimes people use longer windows with a fading memory to kind of capture that. But then the open question is how you actually decide to fade the memory. so there's some interesting issues here, I think, on that. 15 days, incidentally, seems rather short to me for a forecasting window, and it would be interesting to get the comments from the speakers as to whether 15 days is somewhat plausible because the market changes quite rapidly. I would have thought the Swedish day-ahead market was relatively slow moving, particularly given the mix of generating capabilities, but with hydro and nuclear as well as the renewables. But the reasons for not wanting to go back further would be interesting. 50 days seems more standard to me in terms of what you see. And generally speaking, many forecasting models for day ahead use longer windows, but then of course they've got to bring in seasonal effects to cope with the fact that you are straying into different seasons throughout the year. So I suppose one advantage of the short window is that you don't need to capture the seasonal effects to the same extent. With respect to the Garch modeling, it was interesting that the Garch T, where you've got a non-normal distribution, did not add much benefit. The T distribution usually allows you to work with higher kurtosis in the distribution, in other words, fatter tails. Finance people like that in particular because they find that the normal distribution underestimates tail risk. Interesting that didn't come out here. I mean, and I've got some comments on that in the next slide. So I think the modeling setup is a very interesting one. I think it's valid. I think it's an important topic, and I think it's got a number of interesting ingredients, the wavelet in particular, and also the rolling window estimation. Some general comments, and then some specific ones. Mean absolute percentage error, I mean, it's used a lot in forecasting evaluations, but for electricity prices now, a number of people are saying we have to be careful. And that's because, particularly with the impact of renewable energy in some of the mature markets, we're getting prices very close to zero and often negative. And so when prices are starting to hover around zero, an absolute percentage error is not a good thing, because you could get a relatively small error looking huge, obviously, if it's very, very close to zero. So there is less of a focus now, I think, on using MAPE as a criterion, even though it has been the most favored criterion, I would say, in a lot of forecasting competitions in more kind of general business context. So I think the kind of the root mean squared and error is probably becoming a little bit more standard for electricity prices, when there is a significant possibility that they could be very close to zero. Now, as regards Garch, Garch models volatility around the expectation, and generally speaking, it improves the estimation errors of the expectation only slightly. I mean, people use Garch if they want to model volatility. And the evaluations in this paper were not on volatility, actually. They were on the expected value, mean absolute percentage error, root mean squared error. So you were looking at the error. You were not looking at the distribution of errors. And so, Garch will have improved those expected values very slightly. But if you had looked at the accuracy of the distribution, the densities that come out, because Garch will give you all of the quantiles if you want to estimate them, then looking at the kind of value at risk things that people are particularly interested in now, the P5 and the P95, the 5 percentile quantile and the 95% quantile, that's when the Garch value would really show up, because you are getting a time varying estimate of the variance. doesn't show up to the same extent when you're just looking at mean absolute percentage error and root mean squared error. So I would think, given the emphasis on GARCH, that you should basically do yourself more of a favor and have some metrics that measure the accuracy of the volatility estimates that are coming out. And that's fairly standard now. Pinball loss is used in a number of recent papers where quantiles are being tested for their accuracy. Now, I also said previously that I thought the moving window was interesting, and I would have liked to have seen that explored a little bit more, because that is an active and controversial area of research. In a way, you use the length of the moving window to comment on the relative effectiveness of the wavelet. But I think more generally, it would be interesting to find out what a broader sensitivity of estimates would be to the moving window. A bigger range, for example, I think you could go back more than 50 days. I mean, I would like you to go back a year, for example, but then you would need to develop a seasonal model. And then it would be very interesting, I think, to look at the relative accuracy of a longer window, which presumably would allow you to estimate your model a little bit more accurately, but then you've got to get seasonal effects into that, and maybe the shorter window without the seasonal effects is better. I think that is an open question, and I think it does speak to the difficulty of modeling seasonality, particularly if seasonal effects are evolving over time. I don't really want to dwell on this. I think many people could think of a number of methods that were not included in the comparison. But one kind of class of estimation methods, particularly as you raise the issue of a moving window estimate, which suggests that there are evolutionary aspects in the estimation that you might capture better with a shorter window than a longer window. Another approach to that is to use time varying estimation over a longer period. And that has been around for a while, with mixed results, I should say. But that is another way of dealing with that evolutionary aspect. And then, of course, finally, the class of methods that you're looking at do not make use of multiple exogenous predictors. You don't use explanatory variables. And a lot of research in day-ahead forecasting will use weather forecasts, will use fuel price forecasts, will use forecasts of system parameters like reserve margin and potential forecasts of interconnect import-export. So I mean, a lot of research on day-ahead forecasting makes use of day-ahead explanatory variables. And I think in some respects that makes it difficult to compare methods, because the different researchers use different exogenous factors, and different exogenous factors are more or less important in different markets as well. And so in some respects, I think the authors can defend not using exogenous predictors, because it allows more of a focus on the basic time series model. But I think some comments on that would be useful in the paper. I mean, even within the class of approaches that the authors are using, which are mostly ARMA GARCH with wavelengths, you could quite easily go to ARMA X, where X stands for exogenous factors, and a number of people do that. And it would be interesting to see if the conclusions still generalize when a number of potential exogenous candidate variables are included. And those are my main comments. I think just one footnote. In practice, when you talk to organizations now, more and more of them say that they're using deep learning. they won't tell you how deep it is, and they won't tell you how well it learns. But I think that is something that people do talk about, whether they really use it in a fully specified way, or whether it's just a fashionable thing to say, is an open question. But I think comparisons do need to include some machine learning as well these days. So thank you very much. Those are my comments. I commend this paper. I like it. There are a number of interesting features. As with all forecasting papers like this, there are also a lot of extensions that various people could suggest would be worthwhile. And I've made a few of those. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bon, for your extensive and precious comments that provided on this paper. So before I invite Professor Ghazi to answer to the comments, I would like to ask the participants if they have any question. If you have a question, you can use the raise hand function, or you can type your question in the Q&A panel.
Can I respond or share a couple of comments by Professor Bon now, or
Yes,
I can wait
so
for
let's see if there are any other comments or questions. Okay. Then you will have more time for answering. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can look for the questions later. So Qazi, please.
I would first of all, I would like to very thankful to Professor William Bon for your very scientific editorial comments about the paper. And a couple of points, actually, you also give the question, you also give the answer as well. So, but, and it's also this similar thought. I would started to like the point that you mentioned it. If I increase the rolling window, then there is a question for the seasonality. So that's one of the reason I just considered to the looking for the short window at the moment. So this the same things I thinking when I do the estimation. So I don't like to hide you my intuitive thought when I do the computational stuff. That's another important point that you also mentioned regarding the size of the window. So actually, these are the small theoretical paper me and Professor Ramajan Grancy in Simon Fraser, who is the most pioneer in the wavelet related issue. He is my earlier. So we wrote actually theoretical paper about these issues for sensitivity analysis for the rolling window in the crude oil market. But we try to, at this moment, we just look about the 1 day ahead, and we are interested to look about the 1 hour or the high frequency trading data. So in order to get the better understanding of the consistency of the modeling as well as the consistency of the parameter. And also, I think the last point for the organizational perspective that you mentioned, the machine learning, deep learning, or AI-based, artificial intelligence-based model are widely used at the moment in the electricity market. So I actually try to improve right now. This is for the standard approach for GARS types of approach to wavelet base. And also we try to incorporate some of the machine learning tools like artificial neural network to incorporating the forecasting modeling 1 day ahead or high frequency trading data, and try to see how it's performing better. So that actually we also have some plan. And also I think the most important point that you mentioned is the other exogenous factor, because as Sweden is become more renewable, I fully agreed your issues that and the sources of renewable, such as like we need to think about the climate change, the weather, heating, the wind, the day, sun availability. So these are actually the very, very important point at the moment to build a proper modeling in the electricity market. And also, I think you also mentioned it, the regime switching modeling in or time varying other modeling. Regarding the regime switching, because I think if the transitions from one regime to the another regime, then could be also interesting at the moment. But we didn't think about this point much on these issues of the regime switching model, but we are thinking about for including exogenous factor as well as including artificial neural network within the wavelet system, wavelet system, to see whether it is better predictability measure or not. But on the other hand, so many, I'm not sure whether you are agree with me or not, the many academicians still in the predictability said they didn't like much in the artificial neural network or this sort of machine learning. Sometimes it was critically because earlier version of the paper I was presented somewhere and they didn't like it, this artificial, they said it is some sort of black box, so we don't like the black box. We are economists or financial economics, so we looking for some classical approach to compare. So that part, actually the reason I AN part, artificial neural network part, I totally removed from the paper, because as a we are thinking the paper could be more fitted to the audience of the economics and finance outlets. So that's why we remove it for this part, because I don't know. So it's also looking for your opinion. So how should we motivate these deep learning and machine learning approach in the context of economics and finance? If you have a time, I would highly appreciate it for your comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Razi, for answering the comments. If there is any question from the participant.
Can I say something?
Yes, Professor, please.
Yeah, I mean, on that last point, I think it is interesting on the machine learning, and I mean the kind of the topic of electricity, short-term electricity load forecasting. It strikes me as having a clash of cultures. I mean, you have a lot of economists working in it, and this is clearly from an econometric tradition, and it's clear why you would want to go for kind of transparent specification and to kind of understand the estimation errors and so on. But you've also got a lot of people from power systems engineering working in this area as well. And the power systems engineering culture is very favorable towards machine learning. And so, I mean, you're at an intersection, and the kind of the simplest view is the question is, where do you want to publish this? And if you want to publish this in a kind of an energy economics environment, then I think a very brief comment on machine learning is probably all that's really required. And sometimes I've used machine learning as a kind of a test of the robustness of the econometric methods, rather than as an end in itself. But if you were submitting this to the IEEE Journal of Power Systems, for example, which carries a lot of forecasting methods as well, I mean, they would almost insist on some kind of comparison with machine learning. So there's a cultural issue here in terms of academic disciplines, and that makes it interesting. But again, it makes it you're kind of the way you handle it in your paper clearly has to have in mind which of these two audiences you're primarily speaking to.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Many thanks,
Bond.
Professor.
Yeah, so I personally learned a lot from your good comments. So is there any other question or comment on Ghazi's presentation?
Maybe while we are waiting, can I ask?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Ghazi, for your presentation, and Professor Derek, thank you so much for very nice discussion. Yeah, I have a question. So obviously, forecast of energy price is very important, right, for government, for planning, for companies, right, for planning. But do you know? But it's not on your methodology, right? But do you know practically, like, who is using we produce forecast, let's say like researchers produce forecast, and then who is using it? Do industries use our academic forecast, or they prefer produce their own, like Professor Derek said, using artificial learning, or they actually take our like researchers forecast?
Based on in your question, I talked to a couple of electricity companies in Sweden. Based on, so they develop their own model. It's like big companies such as like steel industries, or they are using huge amount of electricity. So they are using mostly their own model, and in that case, that's the professor already mentioned it. The machine learning or AI based approach is become very popular for beating the electricity prices, because in the reason the electricity market prices become very flexible, so they can actually looking for, mostly if I understand correctly, machine learning based are widely used to the industries such as heavy steel mill and etc. So maybe professor has a better opinion also this point.
No, I would agree with you. But I mean, forecasts get used very widely, and some regulatory bodies produce forecasts. If you look at the California market, for example, the California Independent System Operator produces a day-ahead forecast, and participants find that very useful. And you know, that particular forecast is quite transparent, and it's a more econometric type of model. So the number of forecasts are produced as a form of market intelligence. They are widely used. I think they're becoming much more widely used with more kind of demand side engagement, and the need for kind of time of use pricing and to give signals to consumers. I mean, I think a lot still use regression-based approaches. I mean, a number of organizations are not necessarily very sophisticated in their analytical capabilities, and they develop models like this, but relatively simpler models. There's a huge variety, and I think, I mean, it is a big topic, and occasionally the industry runs large forecasting competitions for day-ahead prices, and the engagement there is not just amongst academics, but it's amongst power companies as well. A few years ago, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, out of interest here, organized a big conference and a big competition in that respect.
Okay, so
I received one
Fazit,
question. Can we respond? Yes.
Yeah, there's one question.
So I think I received the question, what can you advise for further research study area to improve your research study? So my plan, actually, the electricity market, I would like to make some sort of generalization of the forecasting model. So the way I'm thinking in this line, so right now, based on the different country has a different sources of the energy mix. So based on the different types of energy mix, could you or should we can give some sort of guideline or some sort of preferable modeling issues could be fitted for them? For example, if a country has become like 40% to renewable, 60% around like that, in that case, probably we can find this type of classified model could be more interesting based on the sum of the exogenous factor after controlling. This is the one important thing that I'm quite interesting of my futures. And I think because in terms of the academic perspective, we have so many different econometrics, machine learning, deep learning, and complex modeling. So sometimes it could be very difficult for the policymaker to choose what would be the best optimum modeling as a reference point to get the policy implication or implement the policy. So should we can generalize a very comprehensive modeling related issues. The second important issues that actually in my interest, the risks. So when we are thinking about the electricity market are connected with the national grid, maybe this is not the problem is much faced in the European level, because European, there is not much big problem for the electricity shortage or scarcity of the electricity. But in the Asian market right now, the Asian market are connected each other, started to connect each other by importing and exporting the electricity. And when we are connected to each other, how the risk transmission are within the electricity market, risk transmission process are connected through the electricity market within the region. So because if X is a country is more dependent on Y. So if there is electricity interruption from Y country to the X country, how this risk transmission can handle it. So these are the part of the literatures I didn't much observe in the developing countries context, where the developing countries are recently connected each other by exporting or importing to the electricity market. So these are so far could be very interesting technical way to look about the future study.
Okay, thank you very much, Qazi. So we are slightly behind the time. Let's move to the next paper. Thank you. Thanks to you and to Professor Bond for discussing the paper. So the next paper is by Professor Heike Wetzel of University of Kassel, Germany. The paper is on competition and regulation as a means of reducing CO2 emissions, experience from US fossil fuel power plants. So Professor Wetzel, mic is yours.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Welcome, everybody. It's an honor to give the last presentation of the day, and my talk today is about competition and regulation as means of reducing CO2 emissions in the US fossil fuel power plants sector. So let me quickly get you into the paper with some information on the sector I'm talking about. So we are in electricity generation, and this market is, of course, one of the biggest energy markets worldwide. What you see here on the slide and the figure below is the electricity net generation from different sources. And what you can see here is that we still have a relatively high share of electricity generation from fossil fuels in the US. So in 2000, it was about 70% when we take together coal, petroleum, natural gas. And until 2018, this decreased a little bit to 64%, but it's still the major part of the sector. And together, coal and natural gas are responsible for around 33% of all energy-related CO2 emissions in the US. So it's a big sector here and a big CO2 emitting part here of the economy. So what we saw in this sector, what's interesting for this paper here is on the one hand, the so-called shale gas revolution. So meaning that since around the mid-2000s, shale gas production picked up a lot in the US. And introduced by that, the gas price dropped from a peak of about $9 per million BTU in 2008 to less than $4 in 2018. What you can see again on the figure in the lower part of the slide. So we see that the coal price for the electric generating plants was quite stable over all the years we are looking at from 2000 to 2018. But then we see compared to that a increase of the gas price until 2008, but then it sharply dropped and stayed on a relatively low level, and the two prices kind of converged to a rather similar level. And you also see the price of petroleum here, which is departing from the others too. So what we think is that because of this price development, that coal and natural gas became new competitors in the electric power sector. And then when we look at the development of the sector, what do we see? We see that in net generation, the part of natural gas increased compared to the part of coal. So, and this is related to some price effects, of course. So in the short term, we know, okay, the power plant fleet is quasi fixed. We cannot change it in the short run. But when the variable cost, meaning the fuel prices change, we see changes in the merit order. And then, of course, we also see changes in the net generation. And in the long term, we observe capacity additions, retirements, and retrofits, which is also related to expectations on the prices, on the fuel prices. But also, this is related to CO2 emission reduction policies, either on the national and or on the state level. So these two things, the increased competition between coal and natural gas-fired power plants because of the price development. So this is one reason why we might see this development, and the other reason might be that we have some regulatory policies around in this area. So what we see in the figure below here, the dashed line is again the natural gas net generation, which increases over time a lot. And on the other hand, we see the solid line which denotes the decrease in the share of generation from coal. So then when we take a look at the state-specific regulatory policies, because this is what makes our data set heterogeneous, so we see, or we look in this paper at 3 different kinds of policies. So first one are the greenhouse gas emission targets. So what we see over the years that we have around under 2018, 20 states in the US that set greenhouse gas emission targets. They vary in the years, in the base level years, and they vary a bit in the targets, whether it's 50 or 80% under 2050 and these things. But at the end, they are these 20 states down here in 2018, they have implemented such targets. Then the second kind we are looking at is the CO2 performance standard, or other CO2 performance standards. And this is not so common on the state level. As you see, like Oregon started really early in already 2000, but until today, until 2018, we only have 6 states that implemented performance standards. Another problem with this kind of regulatory policy is that the standards differ a lot between the states. In many of the states, we have the standards only for new power plants, not for the old ones, or only for big power plants. So here we see a huge variety in how strict the standards are. And then finally, we look at regional cap and trade programs. So the first one was the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative of 10 states in 2009. Here you see only 9 because one of the states is not included in our sample. I come to this later. So here we have this initiative in the East Coast area. And then in 2013, we have California. They also implemented a cap and trade program for their electricity sector. So looking at these developments, our research aim is to analyze CO2 emission performance of the gas and coal-fired power plants. And this is important. It's only a gas and coal-fired power plants. So we don't include any renewables here because we only want to look at developments in this part of the generating sector. And we look at the state level and we compare the emission performance across states. So it's a relative comparison over time. And then we want to shed some light on how external factors such the shale gas production or the state-specific regulation may have altered this performance. And for that, we're using a non-parametric benchmarking approach, and we heard about this approach already a couple hours before. So we're using DEA, data envelopment analysis, in combination with a global input distance function, and then we estimated so-called global monstrous CO2 emission performance index, the GMCPI. And then in the second stage, similar as the presentation from this morning, we use a second stage regression to look at external factors having an impact on this. So what's an input distance function model? What we do is we model the technology as a distance function. And in the distance function, we have the axis, the inputs. So in our case, it's a fuel input and it's a nameplate capacity in each state. Then we have Y, this is a good output, namely the electricity production. And we have B, which is a bad output, and this is the CO2 emissions. And in our case, we look at how much can we decrease the CO2 emissions given the level of inputs and the level of good output. And then this reduction is represented by theta, and this is a so-called distance function value. Then this one is bounded below by 1. So if this value is equal to 1, we identify the state we are looking at in that moment as efficient. And if this value is higher than 1, it's inefficient. And for better interpretation, what's usually done in this kind of studies is we use the inverse of the distance function value, and then we have a so-called Farrell measure of technical efficiency, and this one is lower or equal to 1, again with 1 indicating that the specific observation is efficient. And as I said before, we use DEA to obtain these distance function values or efficiency values. And what you see here is the approach how we look at a dynamic development over time. So what we have is we estimate different frontiers from the distance function. For example, right here, the FPT is the area with all the feasible combinations of the good and the bad output in the year T. And for example, if a state is operating in point B, the state is efficient. And if the state is operating in point A, it's inefficient, and the distance between these 2 points indicates the level of inefficiency. And then we do this for other years, like here, for example, for PT plus 1. And we do this in one model where we include all years, and this is called the global frontier, which envelopes all other frontiers. So includes all years and looks at the whole sample. And then we can, again, have different distances we can look at, and these are all parts of our Mount Crest index, and they can also be decomposed in different parts. And one part is the so-called efficiency change, which measures the catch-up of a state to the frontier from one year to the next. So do they go along or come closer to the frontier, to the best practice states in that year? And the second part is the so-called best practice change. And this is what you saw in the figure here. This is the shift of the frontier from one year to the next towards the global frontier. And in that case, we observe a technological progress. If this frontier would be below the PT frontier, of course, we would see a technological regress. And if all these values are higher than 1, we see a progress. If they are lower than 1, we see a regress. So what's the data we're using? We use the panel data set from 48 US states without Vermont, because Vermont does not have any fossil fuel generation, electricity generation from fossil fuels. And we excluded Hawaii because of its isolated geographical location away from the mainland. And here just some numbers on the descriptive statistics. We have the good output, the net generation, the bad output, of course, the CO2 emissions, fuel consumption measured in billion British thermal units. Nameplate capacity is a proxy for the capital. And what you just see here is we have really big states, of course, the maximum values, for example, for Texas, and we have really small states where the minimum values here are for Idaho. And we observed this for around 19 years. So let's go to some results. So I don't want you to look at all these numbers, but just to give you an indication about, so the best performing state in the efficiency and static efficiency from one year to the next is Rhode Island. And you see this here for all the years, Rhode Island did pretty good, almost 100% efficient. But we also have other states like Connecticut, who's ranked second in 2018. Connecticut developed over the years a lot because they had a huge change from coal to gas in that state. And then down here, you see two states that perform almost constantly very bad. So, but on average, we see an increase in efficiency over the years. But let's focus on the MINCREST index, the global MINCREST CO2 performance index per state, because this is the index provides us a view on the dynamic development over time. And here we see that some states do really good, like Mississippi. They increase the performance a lot, which is mainly based on change in efficiencies. So they catched up to others that already perform good. The same applies to Virginia. They also perform very good or develop very good with a relatively high efficient change and a relatively small technological change. And on the other hand, we see other states.
2 minutes left.
Yes, thanks. We see Montana and Wyoming, for example, that do relatively bad, let's say, in that performance index. Wyoming is interesting because it's efficient on the frontier, but it's located on a part of the frontier where we see a technological regress. However, on average, we see an increase in the performance of around 27% over all years, which is driven mainly by technological progress. Okay, let's quickly go to the second state regression results. As I said, we have a couple of things we looked at. The prices, it's not surprising. So if the gas price increases, we see a decrease in the performance index. The targets are good for performance, and the regional cap and trade is also good for performance. Interestingly, the standards, we find a negative effect. I'll come back to this in just a minute for the results. And we have some other controls here I don't want to talk about a lot. We looked at the fixed effects model. We also looked at the 2SLS model because we have some issues with reserve causality in this setting. So let me conclude. What we find is positive development on average, 27% over the years, an increase in CO2 performance. And this applies to 42 of the 48 states. But on the other hand, we also see efficiency losses for about 1/3 of the states, so that we can say that 1/3 was not able to follow this development. Then we see that the gas price and two of the regulatory policies we looked at had a positive effect on the performance, but we found a negative effect for the performance standards. And this might be because we see these variation in the standards, and that many or 3 of the 6 states that have the CO2 performance index standards only implemented them for new power plants. So this is kind of or suggests that this is kind of a weak regulatory policy they introduced here. So on the whole, we see that interfuel competition and stringent CO2 regulations are suitable means to promote CO2 emission performance, but we have to be careful and look at maybe weak regulations. They may even decrease the performance. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you very much, Professor, for presenting your interesting paper. So I would like to invite Professor Sun Waping of Jiangsu University. Professor Sun is Dean of Division of Low Carbon Economy and Environmental Regulation in Jiangsu University of China. So Professor Sun, please discuss the paper for 10 minutes.
Okay, very good paper. It's very, very informative and very, very, standard, right? The topic is about the competition and regulation as a means of reducing CO2 emission. Okay? Experience from U.S. fossil fuel power plants. Okay? So 3 points. First one, the significance of problem. Second, main innovation points. And the last point, some key suggestions, okay? These people analyze the relative CO2 emission performance of the fossil fuel electric power sector approach, which is very good. Very good. As we know, in 2018, 43% of total US net electricity generated from fossil fuels was generated from coal and 55 from natural gas. Okay, so as we can see from the picture below, the coal is decreasing while the gas is increasing.
Professor Son, your sound is not clear. Internet connection is not well. We cannot hear you. Professor Son?
Looks like his picture froze.
Yes. So let's wait a little bit. Yeah. Professor Son, we cannot hear you. It's not clear. The internet is not well. The
I
connection
suggest,
is not...
Huaping, you put your camera off.
Yes.
That will save your internet and stop. Will stop you sharing, and then we share for you. Okay. Ranjita, could you please share for Huaping San?
Yes, I'm sharing.
He left, right? I think his internet cut probably. He's left.
Yes, let's wait a few moments.
Maybe for her to save time, shall we do discussion Q&A?
Okay. So if there is any question, so let me ask one question. So the paper was very interesting. So the question that I have is regarding the methodology, that why you use DEA. What are the reasons behind selection of this method? If you kindly explain about this.
Sure. So in general, when we do this kind of benchmarking analysis, we have the choice between a parametric or a non-parametric method. And the parametric method usually has the advantage of accounting for noise, right? But we have the disadvantage that we have to define a functional form. And if we don't define a correct functional form, we make a mistake there. And then we have some other issues there. And with the DEA, the non-parametric model, we don't need to make all these assumptions. So it's a very flexible methodology, and it's really good to use when you have a relatively small amount of inputs and outputs. So you can go with a relatively small amount of data. So this is why we opted for a DEA here, but of course you can also use then a parametric stochastic frontier analysis for the same purpose if you want.
I see. And meanwhile, I think it would be interesting, if the data is available, to consider other types of emissions, for example, NOx or PM2.5. I think the data on the state level is available, so that will make it more interesting. Because on carbon emissions, there are several works, but on other types of emissions which are even more harmful. And so because when we are comparing, for example, carbon emission with NOx and PM2.5, especially PM2.5 has more negative impact on health. So that would be more interesting, and I think it can increase the novelty of your work.
Actually, I think for the US, there are also already a lot of papers doing that, right?
Yeah. Yes. So is there any question from the participants? So there is one question related to in US election. How will the US election influence your results? The US is officially withdrawn from the Paris Agreement now. Will there be the same incentives needed now?
Okay, I was just depends on how wins. We don't know yet who wins, who knows. But actually, that's a good question, because when you look at the time period in the paper, within that time period, we had the Obama administration and we had the Trump administration, right? And the Obama administration wanted to introduce a really strict federal state regulation on fossil fuel power plants. What was this? The Clean Coal Plan or similar. They tried to or wanted to implement that. And then after the election, Trump came up, and of course he canceled that program. And now we have the Affordable Clean Coal Act, and this is a lot less restrictive. So yeah, probably the election might change some things here for the next years.
Yeah. Yes. Is there any other question from the participant? We still have 5 minutes time. Okay. So if there is no more question,
there's one more.
Is there
Q&A?
Okay, so I got one new question. Where coal is located in many US states, there is the view that coal is cheap. Do we need to reevaluate the cost of coal?
I would say yes. Right? So we should price the coal depending on the damage it's doing, right? So we are talking about CO2 pricing.
Okay.
So these are given at the extraction and not just emissions. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So another question is, subsidies are given at the extraction level and not just emission.
So that's more common
response.
Yeah, but I totally agree to that. I mean, this is also what we see when, especially when we look at the Trump administration, right? So we bring back coal, we make coal cheap again, and then try to what is this? To increase the coal industry again. So sure, these are a couple of things that's going on in the US. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So is there any other question or comment on Professor Wetzel's presentation before we wrap up this session? Okay, so if there is no more comments, so let's wrap up this session. And so I would like to express my thanks to the presenters, Professor Ghazi and Professor Wetzel, and to our distinguished discussants for discussing these papers and providing constructive comments. Thank you very much. Peter, please.
Yes, thanks very much. It's been a very interesting conference. First, I would like to thank the co-organizers of the conference, the University of Wollongong and Energy Economics Journal. And in particular, I'd like to thank Rabindra Nepal and Farhad for the great support. And of course, I'd like to thank Dina Ashkalieva and her team who made this webinar possible. Over 100 participants registered for this webinar from 31 countries. A majority of the participants, around 60%, are from South Asia and Southeast Asia, 18% from Australia, Europe, and the USA. Most, about 55% from academia and research institutions, and the rest, about 45% from industry. This conference has touched on many important issues, including the need to increase the efficiency of the electric power system, to increase the role of renewable energy in electricity production, and to encourage a shift to lower carbon electricity production. The role of energy pricing was also emphasized, although as noted in the keynote speech, energy pricing strategies can sometimes backfire and have unexpected and perverse effects which need to be analyzed closely. At the same time, equity and welfare remain important considerations for developing countries. So I thought the discussion of the energy trilemma was a very useful framework for considering these issues. And I think the question of how to handle uncertainty is also very important. It's nice to have deterministic models, but uncertainty is a very important factor. So I think we had very many useful comments on the papers. So I hope the authors will go back and revise the papers in response to them. But I think it's been a very successful conference, and let me thank all of the presenters, discussants, and other participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Maybe we can take another photo we took today before start, but we didn't have so many, I think, speakers. Maybe we can have another photo. Please, if you can put your cameras on. Okay, great. Ranjita, are you ready? Okay, I'm taking. Ranjita, can you take? Mine doesn't work.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I stop recording.